All right, good afternoon. We're switching things around a little bit. Today we'll start off with our guests, and we're delighted to welcome back Gilbert Houngbo in his first briefing as the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD. Mr. Houngbo became president on April 1st of this year. Gilbert, welcome back to the UN, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much. As you just mentioned, I took office on April 1st as the new president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I'm very conscious that I'm assuming my new function at a time where famine threatens more than 20 million people in several countries, particularly in Africa, and with migration and forced displacement at record level. I'm acutely aware that we need both humanitarian aid and long-term development if we are to reach the goal of ending poverty and hunger. Everyday migrants who send money home try to reach those same goals for themselves and their families. That is why I'm here today to remind you why we should all care about the International Day of Family Remittances. The money that migrants send home, 40% of it to rural areas where poverty and hunger are concentrated, literally saves lives. Yesterday, IFAD launched a report showing that more than 200 million migrants workers are now supporting an estimated 800 million family members globally. This year, the remittances are estimated to total more than US $450 billion, with the US as the largest sending country. We have fact sheets which will also be available with all the latest figures. For the International Fund for Agricultural Development, International Family Remittance Day is not just about billions of dollars, but also about billions of lives. Remittances provide for basic necessities as food, shelter, clothing, so forth. They also have an immense potential for development. But we need to take steps to achieve that potential. Lower cost transaction, increased access to financial services, and policy and regulatory support will help poor people bank and save their money or invest in their rural communities. Investment is key to making rural community places where people can choose to stay rather than migrate in search of opportunities. Rural areas need better infrastructure, technology, links to market and finance if they are to retain their young people. Remittances could help meet some of the need and provide finance so that young people can make a success of farms and businesses. In fact, providing more options for families to use remittances productively will benefit us all. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and now we'll take your questions. Edie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Houngbo. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association, thank you for doing this briefing. You're projecting a very sizable increase in remittances in the next 15 years. Do you see that this is going to be reflective of a sizable increase in the number of migrants as well? And what impact do you think that will have by 2030 on reducing global poverty?
Thank you so much. I don't think that there is a direct link between the... I do not expect to have a direct link between the increase in the remittances and the increase on the number of migrants. The point, though, we are making is that the money that's sent back home help transform the rural area in order to create opportunities especially for the youngsters to feel that they can stay at home and making migration a choice rather than a necessity. The second part of your question, which I believe is also critical, is the contribution to development. We talk about 2017, we talk about 50 billion, and in a lot of countries, we know very well that it's higher than the FDI, is higher than ODA itself. So, and that we'll see that continuing. So it's part and parcel with the whole financing architecture, which is even called by the Finance for Development in the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, for example. So we will expect it by 2030 to really become an important contributor to financing a lot of development activity at the national at the national level, and we have to work to encourage that. That being said, I think the challenge ahead is to trying to continue lowering the cost. The cost for sending money went from about 10% 10 years ago to 7.5% now, and if that can go down to 3% in the current term, you're talking about at least 20 billion, much more invested in development.
Thank you, Rosalind.
Thank you, Mr. Houngbo, excuse me. Could Rosalind Jordan with Al Jazeera English, could you talk about the efforts that IFAD is exploring in working with diaspora groups here in the United States and around the world to help target the remittances and the funding into locally based projects and not into urban based projects? How difficult is it to not put money into urban development where many people end up going before they decide to move overseas? Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are different ways that we are doing that. First of all, we have a facility that we have set up for family remittances that can help channel those remittances to much more productive activities. Now, aside from that, the other dimension is at the country level. What we are doing is to make sure that we help creating the what you call the village saving and loan associations. So when the family receive those money, they can save that in their local association, and that is very, very effective, which is used then to lend money based on project that at the village level, each family member or participant can present to the association, and decision will be made, and that help driving that much more to the productive side of the investment. That being said, also it's also important to recognize that part of the remittance also has to go through the basic services which are otherwise not available, being able to send a kid to school and paying for malaria pills and so forth. So for us, the more we can also work with the countries on the receiving end to increase the receiving locations, which has already increased in if you take the top 23 receiving countries, receiving location has increased from 350,000 to 1.5 million in the last decade, and that we need to make sure that those locations increase in the rural area, which is one. 40% of the remittances are right now directed to a rural area, and our objective also working with the countries receiving end in making at the policy level, creating much more conducive environment for the transaction costs at the national level to be the same as in the urban, whether it's urban or rural. That will help that money channeling much frequently and often to the rural area.
Thank you for the briefing. My name is Abdul Hamid Sayam from the Arabic daily Al-Quds Al-Arabi. And my question is, how much responsible the man-made conflicts for the destruction of agricultural area, and how many people affected with those man-made conflicts? Thank you.
It is very clear that if you look at the current famine that we are talking, be it Yemen, be it northern Nigeria or Somalia or South Sudan, there's a clear link between the current famine and the man-made conflict. Let's really face it, which pose the fundamental issue that when you talk about famine or when you talk about agriculture, governance is also for me, one of the key issues that we should not underestimate, and our ability collectively as international community to swiftly deal with the crisis. So the nexus for me is very clear. However, the other side of it is also the drought dimension and the ability to predict the drought and trying to make sure that one of the challenges I believe we have now at the international community is how do we assist countries to have some kind of insurance scheme against the drought and so forth. This is also the part of the challenge that add to the, in other words, the man-made crisis is a big part of it, but it's not the only challenge that we are facing in terms of dealing with the famine. Maybe the last point that I want to raise on that is, I think I have not need to double check that. I was told that DFID has issued a report which demonstrates that for each dollar invested in long-term development is almost equivalent of $2.9 spent in the crisis management, the humanitarian side, which again make the case about the importance. We cannot stress that enough about investment in the long-term agriculture, which IFAD is doing.
Thank you. Matthew, then Sarah.
Sure. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks for coming to do the briefing. I wanted to ask you a couple of things on remittances. One is there's been a controversy over time about Somalia and about the ability of people to send money back to Somalia, given both unilateral and other sanctions put on remittance companies. So I wanted to know what, if anything, IFAD has done on that, and whether the situation is solved. Also, I saw in a press release put out by Wells Fargo, the large bank here in the U.S., citing their work on remittances, and they're very big in the field, saying that they're partnering with IFAD, and has a quote from a Mr. Brizzi of your agency. Mm-hmm. As you may know, Wells Fargo had faced a massive fine by the U.S. government for creating double accounts. The city of New York no longer does business with them, given their downgrade of Community Reinvestment Act. So what I'm just wondering is, does your agency look at the same kind of things? Do you, if a company comes to partner with you, do you look at its recent criminal and civil penalty history, or does anything go? Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. Clearly, there are two sides of the question. In terms of the Somalia, we are much more, given the overall situation that Somalia has been going through. Our investments has rather been not too much of the receiving, and rather on the remittances, but in terms of water management and irrigation dimension. As regard to Wells Fargo, it's one I thank you for raising this, which obviously you can imagine that I'm going to again follow up on that. But clearly, we do have, just like most of the UN, you have to keep in mind that the International Fund for Agricultural Development is at the same time a UN specialized agency and an IFIs. And on both sides of the coin, you can see that is a very rigorous process that we put to making sure that what I call the public good side of the issue, both in terms of transparency or corporate citizenship, is really adhered to, not only from the angle that you are referring to, but for us also what is also critical. Sometimes we also have to make sure that in our program of loan and grants, we make sure that we don't get ourselves into maybe controversial issues. At the same token, respecting the sovereignty of the government to decide at the end of the day, the loan are for the government. The government has to pay that back. So I will certainly follow up on this, but I'm pretty sure that all due diligence have been carried out before we make our decisions.
Sarah?
Thank you for this briefing. Sarah Brittany Somerset for the Metro. What role do you feel that climate change has played in the ensuing drought and famine in Somalia?
Clearly, and that's what I was referring to when I was talking the case of the drought. It's clear that the unpredictability on side of the rainy season, etc., has a direct link with what we are. So, in my mind, in our estimation, you have the the security or crisis, man-made crisis dimension that your colleague raised before. You have the climate change dimension. You have the governance dimension, and the long-term investment side. So the climate side, we can see that from IFAD perspective, what we have decided to do by 2018 to make sure that all our program we mainstream climate change on all our ongoing program. The second side of it is the importance, which is we are going through our replenishment now, and this is one of the key requirements that we get from our constituency, both from the donor side and the recipient side, is to start working with the smallholders to make sure that it can be through training, it can be through innovation to make sure that climate smart agriculture is being embedded in the practices, which for us is the key issue in sustaining the smallholders' agriculture.
Great. I have one last question.
Point of information, if Gaza came into your report and if you have covered the disastrous humanitarian situation in Gaza. Thank you.
If
they've covered Gaza.
Included the situation in Gaza.
I need to check that. I'm not so sure that it can be part of the receiving the report on the remittances. We need to look at those details. What I have here does not specifically pointed out because clearly it's not part of the top 23 or in terms of the key those that are receiving 100 million or more. But we'll have the fact sheet that I'm referring to will be available right after this briefing that we can also share with you.
Great. Gilbert, thank you very much. And there's information for you on the back table. And we'll do the briefing in about 2 seconds.
Thank you so much.